Hello, folks. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. My name is Roy Bensby, and I'm your host. And I want to explain a little bit about the podcast before we start the show this week. This podcast is an opportunity for me to speak with some of the most interesting people I know that I can find on the internet. So, either with amazing talents or achievements or just unbelievable life stories or invaluable insights into areas that they have dedicated their lives to studying. I sit down with these amazing individuals from all across the world. Really, I've talked to people from, Slovenia to the Czech Republic to Australia to countries in Africa and South America, really just all over the world. And I try to ask them the questions that will hopefully help you extract something valuable or learn something new or just get inspired by. And I do hope that you do get inspired by these talks with some sort of a call to action, maybe change something that you wanted to change for a while, or even just enjoy, detaching from the world for an hour and listening to some great conversations. So, whatever it is that you get from this, I do hope that you extract something from it and enjoy the conversations. All these episodes are available on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google, and the rest of them. You can also find the episodes on my website, which is roybensv.com. You can find a lot of other information about me there as well, from photos to a little bit more insights into who I am if you're interested. And, you can always go to social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me there. I'm pretty active on both those platforms, although the only ones I have. And I try to post regularly so you can stay up to date. And also be sure to put your email on the website. I shoot emails out with updates, news, any new current information that I have will be sent via those emails and social media platforms. So, yeah, make sure you're in the loop. This week on the podcast, we have Patrick Winn. And I was first made aware of Patrick on the show, The Business of Drugs on Netflix, which is an amazing show. You guys should really check it out. They kind of break down different drugs. It's methamphetamine, I believe, coke, heroin, weed, maybe one on synthetics. And he was on the methamphetamine episode, which was focused mostly on Myanmar in Southeast Asia. And that's not somewhere where you would think that they produce a shit ton of meth, but they are the world leaders in meth production, which I didn't know. And he has been in Bangkok and Southeast Asia for a very long time. He's immersed himself in the culture, knows the language, and he's really been extensively covering this topic for a very long time. So I reached out to him. I wanted to know more about it, and he was kind enough to come on the podcast, and we had a really fun time. Like I said, he's been there for a very long time. He knows the language, which I think is a big plus. I don't think most journalists that are based overseas know the language of the country they're in. So that's already a massive plus. We covered two main topics. One would be news and the loss of trust in the news, and the other is drugs. I had no idea Myanmar was such a massive player in the drug trade. There's a direct correlation between how they operate in the north, in the lawless jungles of the north of Myanmar, and the correlation between them and the militias and the government and the corruption and China and all these different players. It's really, really fascinating. As far as drugs, I'm not sure exactly what the solution is. If we look back at the quote unquote war on drugs over the last, 50, 60 years, it has not yielded the results that I think officials and the public or really anybody has tried to accomplish. I think right now you see more people using, the drugs have changed. Now it's maybe opioids are a big thing, and meth, where 50 years ago was probably mostly coke and heroin. So drugs are changing, but the usage has not exactly gone down. People are still dying from it worldwide. And I think wherever we're seeing legalization happen, granted, it's only for weed, which is not a hard drug, you're seeing positive results. It doesn't matter if it's from the generated income from buying the weed or extra jobs, or you're just the fact that you're just seeing that people are smoking responsibly. It's not like once those drugs have become legal, everything deteriorates. It's everyone just keeps going on about their day. They were smoking before and they're going to smoke after. So nothing really changed. The only thing that's changed is now the product that you're getting is better. It can be certified. You know exactly what you're getting inside. Where you're buying things illegally, they can put whatever they want, and there's no real standard. So I do think legalization might be a better way to go about it, but with harder drugs like heroin, meth, opioids, which I mean, opioids are technically legal, some at least. Only the way we abuse them is illegal. So drugs are a very, very difficult bridge to cross, and a lot of people just want to, and mostly politicians, they just want to say it's bad and the people that use it are bad and there's no medicinal properties or benefits, which is completely untrue. They found many, many, many medicinal properties, many medicinal and psychological benefits to everything from shrooms to LSD to MDMA. Even the obviously weed is, I think weed is common knowledge, but almost all these drugs have some properties that can be healing to people. And it's unfortunate we just write them off and we don't let scientists explore them and see if there's anything that of value that they can extract from it. And the other topic that we discussed was the news. I think we are seeing a massive loss in the trust of the public in the institution that is the mainstream media. And having someone on the inside like Patrick kind of confirm that, yes, this is the news right now is not where it should be. It is, for the most part, pushing party agenda, whatever party it's affiliated with, and it's not, or corporate agenda, and it's not really informing the public the way it should be and the way that it used to. An informed public makes informed decisions, and the news is not trying to inform us right now. They're trying to scare us. They are sowing division within the country. They are planting stories and giving you false information. They are becoming infotainment where they prioritize a celebrity going to the mall over 50 people that are shot in Nigeria. It's just completely out of whack. It is not there to inform, it is there to sell ads, it is there to push party agenda, and it's really sad. And and it's there to discredit the other side. And I think that we need to see more people like Patrick. And granted, everyone has some agenda, some bias. As long as you're a human, you have your ideas, you have your thoughts. So you're going to be biased in a certain way. But I think we need to make a concerted effort in order to give the news in the least biased way possible and not stir division in the country. And unfortunately, that is not what's happening right now. But I do hope that we will start seeing that. Right now, people are, when they are searching for news, they will go to, rather than media outlets, they will go to someone like John Oliver or Joe Rogan or I don't know, Andrew Schultz or Sam Harris or all these other people on the internet that are not journalists, but they will take the time out, make a podcast or a show and talk for 20 to 30 minutes. And obviously, in Joe's case, it's up to 3 hours with one person, and they extract the most amount of information out of them in the hopes that we will learn something. And they bring on people who are specialists in their field. And rather than having a shouting competition where five people just scream at each other to get some sort of a clickbait title that someone can press on later and really not get informed from. So I don't think that you should be getting your news from podcasts, but in this day and age, that is the direction that we're heading to. It is, I think, the fact that we have this long form platform allows people to talk for an hour or 2 hours, and no one's really driving a narrative. We're just letting people talk, people who are experts, and they can inform you as best as they can. And I think that's that could be the future of news. I don't know. I just know whatever is happening right now is not ideal. And I think people do seek unbiased, nonpartisan news, and they want to be informed. No one wants to be told what to think. They just want the news given to them. That's just my opinion. So, yeah, this was a really fun podcast. I had a blast. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So, without further ado, here is this week's guest, Patrick Winn.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Hey, Patrick.
Roy, how's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for coming on the podcast in your early morning over there in Bangkok. How you doing?
My pleasure. Yeah, 7 a.m. in Bangkok, waking up to the birds, and ready to do this.
Where are you in Bangkok?
There's no real city center to Bangkok, but I'm in one of the centers, so very centrally downtown-ish location in Bangkok.
Okay. I was there for a while because I was training there, so I was next to. I'll probably be butchering this, but I think it was like called Sukhumvit area.
You are talking to me from Sukhumvit Road right now. Yeah, I'm on one of the splinter roads that comes off Sukhumvit.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I trained there for like maybe like a month and a half or so. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, Sukhumvit is pretty much the main drag. So that's where I am.
That's awesome. I'm sure do you see like a lot of foreign people coming to train Muay Thai there? That's like probably very popular. I remember when it was very popular.
There appears to be, I don't know its exact location, but some sort of Muay Thai training camp on my street, or on my soy rather. And because I see these very tired looking, kind of jacked, lean dudes in Muay Thai shorts that are clearly not Thai, walking up and down the soy, looking like they just got their ass beat. So there's something going on down at the end of the lane.
Yeah. It's crazy. You go there and because the Thai guys are usually smaller than you, but they'll just ragdoll you. They're so good in clinch, and they've been doing this since they were like 3 or 4 years old. And you're like, wow, I feel so emasculated. They're just throwing you around like it's nothing.
Shins and kneecaps made of pure titanium.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's insane. But it's a great experience, and probably the best place in the world, obviously, to train Muay Thai. So that's why a lot of people go there. But how long have you been in Asia, or specifically in Thailand?
I came to Thailand in 2008. At the beginning of my career here, I was just a freelance journalist, just grinding it out. Originally started focusing just on covering the country of Thailand because I was really interested in boosting my language skills. Gradually got the confidence to start writing stories about different parts of the region. So now I would say a lot of my focus is on Thailand and Myanmar, or Burma. But I cover anything from stories on North Korea, stories out of Indonesia, stories from Vietnam. But I would say my expertise is strongest in Thailand and Myanmar.
And you're fluent in Thai, I've heard.
I don't like that word fluent. I can have conversations about very niche subjects. I mean, I was just talking about COVID-19 conspiracy theories with a friend of mine recently in Thai. However, if you so it's that level of conversation. However, if you turn on a soap opera in the middle of the day and say, "Hey, Patrick, can you give us a live translation of what's going on?" I would say, "I have no idea what they're talking about." So it's very context specific. One on one, I'm pretty good. In a big noisy bar with 10 people, I feel like I'm here. I might as well be my first day. I can't keep up.
Yeah. Dude, I'm very interested. What are some popular conspiracy theories about COVID coming out of Thailand?
Oh, it wasn't coming out of Thailand. It's actually a friend of mine who had just watched Netflix and was asking, "Have you heard the Chinese theory that the U.S. military brought the coronavirus to Wuhan?" And I said, "Yeah, well, have you heard the Trumpian theory that, it was created in a Wuhan lab?" And we went back and
Yeah.
forth, just basically making fun of the propaganda of China and the propaganda of the US, because clearly both of them have such a strong agenda to say it wasn't our fault.
Yeah. Yeah. It's we're living in the era of mis and disinformation, and I think no one knows who and what to believe anymore. It's a crazy time.
Indeed, yeah, it is.
Yeah. And so yeah, you've been there for a long time, 12 years. You speak the language well. How long do you think, or in your case, how long do you think you have to like immerse yourself in a culture before you really start to understand it? Because personally, like I like to travel, and I've traveled a lot, not as much as I want, but definitely a lot. And I feel like you have to be in a place for months before you even just start to scrape the surface and really, start to understand it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll speak from the perspective of a foreign correspondent. You would be astonished, Roy, like how many foreign correspondents around the world don't speak the language of the
Yeah.
country in which they're based. Um, and you can even rag on me a bit because I'm covering, let's say, Vietnam. Well, I don't speak Vietnamese. Um, so the way I think that you can really measure how much someone is devoted to getting the story right about the country in which they're based is how well do they speak the language. So I'm vulnerable to that critique in certain places, but in Thailand, I continue to get tutored in the Thai language just to stay fresh. How long does it take? For me, I was able to have some really shitty conversations around the 5 to 6 month mark. And the way that I improved my skills is I would go out with a tape recorder and I would interview people on the street and about this or that story. And I would ask them questions in Thai and they would respond. I would generally have no idea what they were saying back to me, but I would have it on tape. And then I would come back and get someone, usually my wife now, then girlfriend,
Mhm.
to help me understand what the hell conversation I had just had. And so gradually, I needed less help. I understood the conversation, say at a 50% level, and I'm just having to get things checked. Then gradually I got to the point where I could pretty much understand whatever the person was saying back to me. And even now, if I get an answer that eludes me, I'll run and check and make sure that I've got that quote straight. So that's a really unusual way of learning a language that most people aren't going to go for. But for me, it's really worked.
Yeah. I mean, it's do you get any weird reactions when you start speaking Thai to the locals?
Yeah, mostly it's extremely gratifying. Thai people are genuinely pleased and feel sort of honored that you've bothered to learn their language. I wish that in the United States, native English speakers could be a little more respectful of people that have come and are struggling to learn English. Because, God damn, it is really hard, especially if you're
Yeah.
coming. Let's say a language such as Chinese, which is um, the syntax and the grammar are really quite different from English. So if someone is having a conversation with you, they're a native Chinese speaker who's learned English, say at the age of 25, 30, even 40, and they're able to carry on that conversation with you, perhaps with an accent, that person has really worked hard and busted their ass to get to that level. So you should give them props. Nothing is more infuriating to me than well, you're in the US, you should speak English now.
Yeah.
Dude, what if they just got here? Like, come on, it is really hard to go from, especially some of the Asian language where the grammar and syntax are there is really not much overlap with English. You got to give these people a break.
Yeah. No, languages and again, like some people catch on very quickly. Like for example, my wife, she can I don't want to say fluent, obviously not fluent, but she can communicate in 5 different languages. And for me, I know I'm fluent, I would say, in 2 languages. And I've tried to like one of my dreams is to learn Spanish.
Hmm.
Dude, I've been trying to learn Spanish on and off for the last 15 years. I'm at like 40 words at best. It's just like I can't make that transition over. And obviously, I don't live in a country where I have to speak it, but it's just something that I've always wanted to learn. And I'm always so jealous of her because for her, it's just like it's so easy. She'll just catch a new language on like it's nothing. Like, God damn, I don't know how you do it. She's yeah. Some
I'm
people,
envious as well. I really
yeah.
am. That is if I could be reborn and choose my skill set like a video game, I would just add a lot of points to the language category. I would love to be a natural polyglot.
Oh, 100. If I could choose a superpower, I would choose to just know all the languages in the world. Like that would be my superpower. Like how amazing is that? You go everywhere and you're almost like a local. That's the best thing ever.
Yeah. Well, maybe when AI assisted
Yeah.
translation comes online, the superpower will be real if
Yeah.
we're still alive.
When Elon Musk just puts us on the grid as some sort of a AI, I don't know, something. He's working on something. I know for sure.
Yeah, we'll just talk in ones and zeros, and we'll all have the same language.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about something that I don't know if you specifically went over there to cover, but you do cover it extensively now, which is the drugs in the area, and that's how I found you on the Netflix show, which I thought that show was amazing. Like, there's so many drug related shows, but that one just kind of gave it a little bit of a different perspective. And I just, I watched. I think I binged the whole thing in like 2 nights. It was a pretty good show. And usually when people cover drugs or the drug trade, it's usually South America, Colombia, Bolivia, there'll be Mexico, but you went for to Asia, which you don't really correlate with drugs. When you think Asia and drugs, it's not really a hub for trafficking or for production. So is that something that you figured out when you were there? It's not the initial reason you went to Thailand, right?
No, definitely not. I probably started focusing on drug related stories 7 or 8 years ago, and then in the last 5 years, have really regarded it as a specialty. I think in Mexico, especially on the U.S. Mexico border, they have people who are essentially narco journalists. I mean, these are people who their area of coverage and expertise is the narcotics trade. That's great. I can't really name too many people who would call themselves that or describe their career that way in Asia or specifically Southeast Asia. And yet we need more people doing that. So I've tried to fill that void. I'm the type of person who I'm meant to cover all types of stories in the region, but I will actually look up and do research on the drug trade and talk to people about the drug trade on a Saturday or Sunday in my spare time. It's a bit of an obsession with me. I think in general, Hollywood has put this idea into the world that the drug trade is something that happens in Latin America and North America. Okay, that's certainly true. The largest drugs buying market in the world is the United States, but it's also and it's missing a big piece. Right now the drugs trade. Okay, let's just talk about meth alone, which is
Hmm.
the go-to preferred drug in this region. Meth trade alone, the whole market for that is valued at somewhere around $60 billion. So that is bigger than the entire economy, the entire GDP of a lot of countries, medium-sized countries. So why do we only talk about the drug trade as it relates to the United States when in fact, I think certainly this century, if it hasn't already, the narcotics trade in this part of the world is going to eclipse and go past the United States. It's part of this larger story of America's relative decline in the world and Asia coming up and up. And when you have more people with money, more people who have disposable income, some of those people, not a lot, but some of these people, a percentage, are going to buy drugs. And so you see that business going up and up and up in this region, and it needs so much more attention.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, when I was doing some research and reading your articles and seeing some of the videos, there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And I don't think I didn't know these things because I'm necessarily ignorant of what's going on in the world. It's just never discussed here. And it's just not information that you really get. So there's going to be a lot of things that like be questions during the podcast where I'm going to say like, hey, so and so happened and I never heard of it. So I'm just I'm just going to tell you up front, some of these things are going to pop up. But for example, how did Southeast Asia become the world's largest meth trade? I mean, Myanmar being the biggest supplier in the world. Also, I'm also intrigued in how do they calculate the figures? I always hear some insane figures like they only, seize 10% and it's $10 billion. Like, I just always wonder where do they come up with these insane figures?
So they have a lot of ways of coming up with that. Probably the premier agency that's trying to come up with those figures is the UN. And specifically, the UN has an office that just focuses on drugs and crime, mostly drugs, actually. So what they're doing is they're calculating the entire size of the market. So when I say the meth market is worth $60 billion, that doesn't mean that there's a couple drug lords sitting there sharing $60 billion. That is the cost of the chemicals to make the meth, how much you paid the trafficker to take it from the meth lab to the border, how much you paid the distributor to take it from the border to the streets in Bangkok, how much this other guy got paid to put it on a boat and take it to Australia, how much the biker gang in Australia paid for it, how much the dude in Australia paid for 1 gram of that meth. So it's everything. It's probably, not probably, it is also all the money that gets laundered into hotels, casinos, vehicles, jewelry. So it's spread out as, if meth were a country,
Yeah.
it's the entire economic picture of that drug. How accurate is that $60 billion? I don't really know. The actual figure is $30 to $60 billion. So you can see even they don't know.
Yeah.
$30 billion is a big gap.
Yeah.
So I don't know how true that is, but I can say that it is an undeniable fact that the production of meth goes up and up and up in this region. And I think you wanted to know a bit more like how this got started, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a story that not many people know about. Back in this is going to go in a weird direction. So just, you ready to take this ride?
Okay. Yeah, I'm on the roller coaster. I'm already locked in. I'm good.
Okay. In the 1950s, there was a civil war in China. It was against the communists and the anti-communist. The anti-communists are called the Kuomintang, and they were backed by the U.S. So I think a lot of people know that in that war, the communists won.
Yeah.
All right. So, and the people who didn't win that war went to the island of Taiwan. That's why Taiwan is, a separate entity today. Well, not all of the people who lost that war, all the fighters got to make it to Taiwan. Some went over the mountains into Burma. So now they're in Burma. The CIA comes in with a secret plot to help them build up their strength so they can go back into China and defeat the communists. And it was a pretty ludicrous idea because these guys were pretty thoroughly beaten by the communists. But now you have a bunch of guys just hanging out in the mountains in Burma with some old rifles talking about, we're going to go back and defeat Mao. CIA brings in weapons. The CIA brings in radios and radio network to help them communicate, and they basically take over a big patch of Burma. They also need money. So what does this, anti-communist force do? They take over the opium trade and they increase its output by say 2,000%. It's amazing what you can do when you have new model American-made machine guns.
Yeah.
And they just dominate that whole area. And they started what we now would call the Golden Triangle drug trade. So the production of drugs on an industrial scale started in the 50s with the CIA-backed opium-funded army. That is the origin story of the Golden Triangle. So heroin, they didn't hold on to the trade forever. Other narco armies have come and gone since then. And also the other big change is heroin is not as popular as it was back then. The drug in the more like the early 2000s, drug of choice shifted to methamphetamine. So a lot of the poppy fields that those CIA-backed guerrillas were overseeing have fallen into different hands, or some of them have even been mowed down. So methamphetamine is the drug now. So that's the
And that's Yaba, right?
history. That's yaba. Yeah, yaba. Ya means medicine, and ba means crazy in Thai. And we can talk more about that drug if you like, but that is the 2.5 minute history of the Golden Triangle that is very rarely discussed. It's always put on sinister, dark drug lords. No one wants to talk about the CIA's involvement in helping them get their business going.
Yeah, I feel like the CIA and America in general was obsessed with communism during, 60s, 70s, and the 50s even. So whenever there was a communist ruler or country, they would try to, back the opposite militia. And for the most part, it didn't go too well. Obviously, it did in some parts, but there's so many stories where there's people still affected to this day. So
yeah, and I think what people really need to understand is they watch movies like The Bourne Identity and Mission Impossible, and they imagine that the American secret agent world of secret agents is omniscient, omnipotent, all controlling, brilliant. Men, a lot of these guys did not know what the hell they were doing, and they hatched all sorts of plots that didn't work out, got people killed, have redrawn borders in the world, have massively affected the lives of people. And then the US just moves on, or they never really dwell on it. That has happened in this part of the world in a big way and shapes the drug trade that we see today.
wow, that's crazy. So I mean, for you as a journalist, how dangerous is it going into some of these places, talking to warlords or militia leaders or just narco traffickers? How do you make contact with nefarious people that operate outside the law and by default want to stay anonymous and, under the radar?
Yeah, I have a few tricks. Some of them I can talk about, some of them I can't. Um, I think the main thing for people to understand is that men and women involved in drug trafficking are not necessarily violent people or natural born killers, or they don't just sit around, sipping tequila out of human skulls. I mean, they're moms and dads too. They're part of families. They love their aunties and uncles. They're, I don't want to say normal people because they have an abnormal job that's shunned by society. Some of them are killers. Some of them are just morally abhorrent people. A lot of them aren't. It's a job. If you go and do a survey of say hitmen, assassins, you're gonna get a lot of people that have true abnormal psyches. If you talk about the drugs trade, this is a business. And so a lot of these people are involved in a business. And so they're not necessarily, out to drink your blood. So I usually, one of the main things, if there's any journalists listening to this, one of the best pieces of advice I can give is talk to people who used to be involved in the thing that you're interested in. So if you want to talk to someone who was working in intelligence, talk to someone who used to work in intelligence. If you want to talk to someone who's in the narcotics trade, talk to someone who up until recently was a smuggler, because they're going to be much more open and candid with you than someone who is currently involved in that life. So a lot of times I'm specifically looking at people who have recent experience in the trade but are trying to get out. That's one way I can do it, that I found really helpful.
Wow, that's interesting. And through them, you getting into people who are currently doing whatever they're doing in that world.
Yeah, let's say I quit my job today, and someone wants to talk to me about how the media works, how journalism works. Well, all my friends are still in the media. All my friends are still journalists, so I know what they're talking about, and I'm pretty much up to date on everything that's going on in my career field, even though I might have quit 2 years ago in this hypothetical. Well, same with them. I mean, all their friends are still doing this stuff. All their friends, this is their world. The careers define people's worlds, and to a large extent, and so their information is still accurate.
Have you had any close calls? Something that you were genuinely scared for your life, or that hasn't happened?
I have, to a certain degree, but not in covering the drugs trade. I can elaborate if you like. It's something I can talk
Sure,
about.
yeah, man.
It's
I'm here to hear your stories.
Well, I don't want to put this story out like I'm swashbuckling danger guy, because I know people who, especially videographers and photographers, who have really been to um, very violent been in very violent scenarios, and I'm not that guy. I'm not particularly brave, so um, this is just one small story that happened in 2010. There was a very large uprising against the government, trying to convince them to hold new elections. And long story short, the army came in and did a crackdown. Um, I was in Bangkok at the time and covering this on the ground, and I was standing in a large crowd of protesters. The army was sort of all around us. There's like burning tires, black smoke in the air. The protesters are throwing little baby Molotov cocktails at the troops, trying to piss them off. And then suddenly the gunfire rings out and starts hitting the concrete around people's feet, like they're shooting at the ground.
Jesus.
And so I panic, and in my panic, I run the wrong way and I run towards the soldiers, and I get kind of stuck behind an ambulance, realizing I've just made a terrible mistake, because now the crowd has dispersed, and if I go run in the right direction, I'm now running over open ground. So there's no one around me to provide any sort of cover.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not. This is 2010. I don't know what I would do now, but at the time, I just said, "Screw this! I can't just hang out here," and I just ran for it, across that sort of open road, hoping nothing bad happened, and nothing bad did happen. I think they were just shooting at the concrete to make people disperse, which worked. The funny thing is, and I would urge anyone who's watching a really gnarly protest on TV to remember that those cameras are aimed at the craziest shit happening in that city, and all around that city, it may or may not be relatively calm. And that was the case in Bangkok at the time. I ran all the way home back to my apartment. Obviously, pretty distressed, sweating, panicked. I opened the door, and three of my wife's college friends were sitting on the couch. They had just arrived on holiday, and they were like, "Oh, do you know if the market's open?" I was like, "What?"
Let me tell you a story, people.
I think I was like, "I don't know," and just fucking went in the shower, just rinsed off. So, um, that's probably the most dangerous situation I've been in. I must say that I don't usually fear violence happening to me. I fear getting in trouble with the police or the authorities, because the more likely scenario is that I would be detained And even for me, I must say there's a bit of privilege in being an American citizen because Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, any of the countries in this region are much more likely to detain one of their own citizens
Yeah.
than me. Because if you detain me, it's a diplomatic issue with the United States, and better to kick me out or turn me loose than keep me in prison for 2 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's I always think about those. I was in Thailand many years back, and we went to the full moon party, and and they had a whole sting operation or setup operation, whatever you want to call it. Like I know they do this every single night, and my friend just happened to be one of the guys that night that he fell. Um, I guess you can say victim to the setup. And what they do is they basically have some random guy on the beach with a joint, and then he comes up to you and is like, "Hey, you want to smoke?" And you're like all drunk, and you're on the beach, and you're drinking buckets, and you're like, "Sure." And he grabbed the joint, and as soon as he did, like two police officers put handcuffs on him. It took him to jail. And I'm like, I'm in my mind, like the banged up abroad, the locked up abroad show is just like
Yeah.
running through. I'm like, oh no, he's gonna spend years in jail now. All this, like, oh, and I was just like, I didn't know what to do. So I run up to the police officer, and he's like, come to the jail, come to the jail. So I I go quickly, just make a long story short. I go to the jail. He puts a number down. I come back after a few hours after I got the money. I give him the money. My friend was out in the morning, right? He spent like maybe 6 hours. And there were so many other foreign people in a small cell together with him. And I'm sure they probably fell, victim to the same thing. And then after I paid the money and my friend got out of jail, we went to the beach to just relax. And I see the police officer with all his friends like drinking like fine whiskey, just laughing. I'm like,
That you paid
motherfucker.
for.
That's my whiskey, man. Like,
Yeah.
damn. So
Do you recall how much that payment was?
if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this was a long time ago. If I'm not mistaken, it was something like 40,000 baht. Yeah, not
Yeah.
cheap.
So in the north of $1,000. That sounds about right. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
You did the right thing. You did the right thing. I mean, um, there was very little motivation on behalf of the police, I'll guarantee you, to process your friend into the system and have to deal with all of the paperwork of booking, not booking, but charging a foreigner over, taking a puff.
yeah.
Your fear was maximized. You were willing to pay a large amount of money to make that fear go away, and the game goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They make a killing there, man. I have to tell you, he makes a nice little penny with his little racket that he does down there. But
I'll
that's
bet.
why Thailand's funny. It's a land of paradox and contradiction. I guess maybe just like any other country. But on the one hand, it's very liberal, right? With the sex and lady boys and underage sex, and I know men come from all over the world for that kind of shit over there. And on the other hand, they're very strict with narcotics, with alcohol. They have very harsh penalties from life imprisonment for I don't know a couple of joints to death penalty for traffickers. And I think in the West, it's very hard for us to conceptualize and normalize that in our minds.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize the connection between, say, the United States and Thailand in its really harsh drug war style approach. Where do you think they learned it from? The United States has been the has considered Thailand, one of its primary allies in the global war on drugs, going back to the late 70s at least. And we will never know what Thailand's attitude towards narcotics would have been without the US influence, but we know what it has been, and that means locking a lot of people up. More than 50% of the people locked up in Thailand are in there for drug offenses. And
Well,
this is a like supercharged version of the war on drugs that as it is waged in the United States. So it really has a lot to do with the influence of the United States, the arming of Thailand's anti-narcotics police, the training exercises go here. I mean, you've got anti-narcotics Thai police who are at the firing range getting instruction from U.S. instructors that can, drop bullets right on that bullseye. I mean, they know what they're doing, and they have a warlike attitude towards drugs. However, I do think that Thailand is at a turning point, and this goes for a lot of other countries that the United States considers allies in the war on drugs. That turning point is, do we want to keep doing this? I mean, is the United States really the country that you want to imitate? Anyone who turns on the news right now will get an impression of a government that doesn't really have a grip on what's going on. Is the war on drugs working? Obviously, the answer is no. So, does Thailand and other countries, do they want to extract themselves from that big brother, little brother relationship? We'll see. We'll see. But I've talked to anti-narc agents in Thailand who will privately concede that this is not working, and it is a little weird to be locking people up on marijuana charges under the guidance of the United States when they turn on the news and they say, "Oh, guess what? Weed is legal in Colorado, California,
Yeah.
much of the country." So it's it doesn't make a lot of sense, and those contradictions will have to be dealt with pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean it's not only Thailand, right? In Asia, I mean it's Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia. All these countries have, I believe, death penalties for either drug use or the selling of drugs. And but like you said, I'm not sure that has really deterred either the consumption or production or trafficking of any of the drugs.
No, and we need a different mindset towards people who buy drugs, because clearly they're continuing to buy them. All the killing, all the seizures, all the petty arrests aren't scaring people in the way that they want them to. I mean, they want to scare people so bad that they don't buy drugs, but it's not working. I guess people really like doing drugs. But if this mindset, this drug war mindset, was carried out with perfect efficiency, right? So if you were able to lock up everyone who has ever tried, let's take pot out of it, okay? And let's go with the quote unquote hard drugs. So cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin, LSD. So you want to lock up everybody who's ever tried that, right? So you got to lock up me. You got to lock up my dad. Yeah, Roy. Got to lock up Roy. You got to lock up Oprah Winfrey and Paul McCartney and all of these celebrities that people adore. And of course, people with clout and power, or even that are just upper middle class, always manage to wriggle out of prison sentences, both in the U.S. and in this part of the world, certainly. So who actually suffers, who actually gets thrown in that cage? Working class people, poor people. It's the same in the United States as it is here. So do we want to keep doing that? Obviously I've given away my opinion, but I think a lot of these countries need to figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, I feel like we've been doing the same thing, this war on drugs, and it's obviously not working. I mean, they tried squashing the drug trade in Colombia, and now I think they produce more than ever. I don't know if it's in Mexico or Colombia, but they're producing more cocaine now than they ever have. And I feel like whenever there's economic opportunity in countries that are politically pretty weak or just sometimes maybe poor and developing, there's going to be militias and groups and other people that are just going to capitalize. They're going to, they're going to see an opportunity for it to make money, and they're just going to capitalize on it. And the war on drugs has cost billions and billions of dollars and countless deaths. And the governments have barely made a dent. Like, people are still consuming drugs at record levels. And again, like, I think we have to take a different approach. Like, weed, just legalize it across the board. Just like we did with alcohol. Alcohol is just, it's a very dangerous drug. Cigarettes are a very dangerous drug. Chocolate, you can say, is a danger. There's a lot of things that we get addicted to, but we don't go just making it illegal and demonizing them. And obviously the harder drugs like heroin and meth and those kind of, I don't know what we do with them, but what we've been doing just is just not working. It hasn't worked, and it hasn't made a dent in consumption.
My argument would be we start with at least not throwing people in prison, throwing people in cages for doing drugs. Because the reality is, when most people do methamphetamine, take methamphetamine, they feel pretty awesome for a while, then they feel like shit for, it could be a couple of days, and then the cycle repeats itself. They don't necessarily go out and hurt anyone. We already have laws. If you are high on methamphetamine and you go out and rob someone, lock them up for the robbery. You can do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So that would be step one. As far as the overall market goes, I don't think you'll find many people arguing for a total legalization and liberalization of drug laws for, say, methamphetamine or heroin, because that would mean you're driving down the road in New Jersey and there's a big billboard that's like, try meth, So I don't.
Free market.
Yeah, total free. I don't think you'll find almost anyone who argues for that. You can find people on the more fringe end of the spectrum who say the government should produce it and regulate it and track it. And then the next step down that becomes more politically palatable is decriminalization. So that just means the drug syndicates are still going to make it, and you can go after them if you like. But if you catch me and Roy with some drugs, then you just take it from us and say, get lost. I think that future is foreseeable in many parts of the world. And we'll see what happens after that. I mean, look, I can tell you, having talked to a lot of drug traffickers and even petty drug dealers, they're not viewing this through like a moral lens. It's just all business for them. Some people are good at business. Some people are bad at business. Some of the most wanted people in Asia, like, wanted by the DEA and the Department of Justice in the US, are quote unquote drug lords. But if they were, if they were CEOs in any other career field, they would be writing memoirs, and you would be buying them. So just like people buy like Steve Jobs books or tips for success, because
Yeah.
they're just these guys out there that are incredibly good at producing and trafficking drugs. And what a lot of people don't understand is the people that produce the drugs, the people that traffic the drugs, the local distributors, they're all different networks. And so these are different career fields within the overall career field of narcotics that you can specialize in. And I mean, I don't know if you watched Breaking Bad. Okay, so Gus Fring, who was the meth distributor in the United States with his Pollos Hermanos chicken.
Yeah.
The guys that are the best at this have his personality profile. They don't run their mouths. They don't wear gold chains. They don't have girls by the swimming pool. They're not giving interviews. One thing that astounded me is El Chapo, who is no doubt a highly intelligent person, to say nothing about how moral he is, because we're probably a pretty ruthless guy. But he gave an interview to Sean Penn.
Yeah, I saw that.
What the hell? And guess what happened not long after that? He got tracked down and arrested.
Yep.
So, and his sons are on Twitter. This is the guys that I'm thinking of who are top of the heap of the Southeast Asian drug trade would never do anything that's stupid. So these are the personality profiles that actually excel.
Yeah, I think there is this, because forever we kind of, especially in Hollywood, we've glorified drug dealers, right? Like there's so many people from Escobar to people I don't know that maybe aren't even real, like I don't know, Scarface and or all these other people who are heroin dealers, cocaine dealers, weed dealers. There's so many movies about these type of people, and I think we always, I don't know, I don't want to say look up to them. I think once it goes into killing, then we lose the respect. But I think there is something about this person making millions of dollars, right? Like running a scheme, and the FBI is not able to catch him, and there's a coolness factor that comes with that, and I think people have always been attracted to that, and again, like with Hollywood, it's always been very popular. But I think people are okay with drugs. You know what I mean? Like that's not a big deal. They're like, yeah, okay, he dealt drugs, and that's cool. And wow, he had a mansion, and he had all these women, and he had an elephant in his backyard, whatever it was. But once it comes to killings, I think that's obviously the type. That's where we, okay, no, I'm out. That's too much for me.
Yeah. Everyone loves an outlaw, and I think
Yeah,
people's moral barometer is probably on point because of the trafficking of drugs it's not a nice way to make a living. I always think about, like, if you work for the world's largest arms manufacturer, which I think is Lockheed Martin. I don't think that's a particularly nice way to make a living either.
no.
But if someone said, "Oh yeah, my dad works at Lockheed Martin," you wouldn't be like, "You animal." Except my dad is Mexico's largest heroin distributor. People would be like, "That is terrible. That is shocking."
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so the violence, basically, I think that the government, the state, makes a calculation when it makes drugs illegal. It says, "Okay, this is illegal. So the people who produce it are going to be criminals. They're going to have to operate outside the law." What that means is you're creating conditions for more violence. So if you and I are in the same career field, or we start a business together, we get in a business dispute, you embezzle money from me, I embezzle money from you. What are we going to do? We're going to take it to court. And that's a place where we can solve that dispute without violence. If you are crossed by another trafficker, or they encroach on your turf, or they take they raid one of your factories and get a lot of your product, there's no court to go to. So the only way that you can settle that is through money or violence. I can tell you that the top drug traffickers, or the people at the top of these organizations, do not want to see violence. They absolutely don't want to see violence because it's expensive. It's expensive to have these drug wars. It doesn't just cost human lives, but it costs money. And these are financially motivated dudes. So they would, and you see this in the drug trade in both Mexico and Southeast Asia, where at times you'll have different syndicates carving out different parts of the country, and they'll try to stay in their lane. I will say that, and we can talk about this more if you like, the extraordinary violence that you've seen on the U.S.-Mexico border because of the drug trade has not been seen at that level in Southeast Asia. And I think that I have a few theories as to why that is, but a lot of it has to do with the drug trade operators in this part of the world have been more effective at picking their lanes and staying in it and avoiding conflict.
yeah. And I mean, like you said earlier, I mean, if Philip Morris or Anheuser-Busch or McDonald's, like they're killing people at record numbers. I don't know, 100,000 people each year from alcohol. Another 100,000 people die in the U.S. from tobacco, and who knows how many people have died from McDonald's and Wendy's and all the crap food that we're ingesting on a daily basis here. And that's why I do think that, obviously, I don't know. Again, it's tricky. I don't want to say legalization of everything, but I definitely think legalizing some of the aspects or some drugs would, I think it would just benefit society at large. I don't see people going in record numbers just because there's a cocaine store or a meth store. Just because it's there, I don't think it's going to drive more people, or more people are going to go and oh, okay, let me try this really dangerous drug. Like, it's not like common sense is going to be thrown out the window. There's still, I think you invest just as much in education and explaining, from a very young age, why this isn't good and why you shouldn't do it. And I just feel like if there's some sort of reform and education and enough investment in education, um, I don't know, maybe that's a path, but
It's one way to look at it. I think this is the struggle that most people have with this conceptually. So you say the well, if you have a legalization program where the government is overseeing the dispensing of hard drugs, you're going to have more people trying those drugs, because anyone who wanted to try them but was just too scared, now they can go to the CVS or the in my home state of North Carolina. If you buy alcohol, you have to buy it from a government operated store called the
really,
ABC store. Yeah, so you can't go to the supermarket and buy a bottle of Jack Daniels. You have to go to a government supervised store. Okay, so let's say that is the scenario in the U.S. Only now, guess what? They're selling grams of coke. All right, but at least, and we know the coke is not doesn't have any impurities. It is what it is. Still give you a heart attack, but but it is as advertised. Okay,
yeah.
so I think the majority of people would say, no, dude, no, because you're just going to have more people on these drugs having health problems. It's not worth it. Okay, fair enough. I understand that argument. And so you say, okay, so you prefer the current system where we've had tens of thousands of people dying on the U.S.-Mexico border, where people are thrown in cages for doing something that, again, as we've discussed, me, Roy, my dad, and Oprah have done. So they never think, well, that you have to pick one, and you kind of do. There's this super hardline justice official in Thailand. This is not a cuddly guy. This is not a reformist. This is a guy with an authoritarian streak. But he said, he was talking about the U.S.-led drug war, and he said, clearly the drug war is being lost. We have to come to grips with the fact that drugs in our society, it's like a person living with cancer. So how do we best live with this disorder? And he's getting at something that I think is true. Drugs are going to exist. So there is no scenario, there is no fairy tale land where they don't exist and everything's fine. You can't have it both ways. So you either get to pick from the social disorder from having the government dispense it, or you have the social disorder from having El Chapo and his network dispense it. But you've got to pick one. So pick your favorite, but don't ever imagine that it's just going to totally disappear. We haven't seen that.
It's also very subjective, right? Like, what do we consider drugs? Like, obviously, alcohol and cigarettes are widely available, and weed is, I'm assuming, going to become legal in definitely in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. So, why do we? And there's so many other plants that maybe aren't as popular. That I'm sure you can go to South America and lick a frog, and like, are we going to make frogs illegal? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's just so subjective. So I don't know. Yeah, it's very tricky. There was a part I watched one of the documentaries that I believe you produced, and there was a part in the documentary where these Christian vigilantes were just viciously flogging these poor people in Myanmar, and who may or may not have used drugs. And I mean, even if they haven't used drugs, after getting hit with a stick for a few times, you're just going to say, yeah, yes, I did it. Just leave me alone. And they put them in these like medieval stocks. And yeah, it was, it was sad and kind of heart wrenching to see those poor people getting hit and for something that is I mean, out of their control at a certain point, right? Like if they're addicted, it's not something they can control. And they're not even like doing this because they committed a crime. They're just doing this because of the fact that they did the drug. Like they're hitting them just because of the fact that they did the drug.
Yeah, were you surprised that they even let us film that?
I was.
Yeah, so was I. That was a pretty surreal experience. And just to give more context, yeah, this is a pretty uh, uh, far-flung part of northern Myanmar, northern Burma, that's inhabited by a indigenous group. So they most people in this indigenous group are supremely unhappy with their treatment by the government and the military there. And so they actually coming at it from a different angle, and it was really interesting. It was, wow, it sure is easy to buy drugs around here. And up in the hills, this is where the meth labs are. This is where some of the premier meth labs in the region are operating. It looks to us, is what they would say, it looks to us like the government is letting our backyard, our indigenous homeland, our native lands be this drug factory where you can buy meth on the street, no problem. So they actually were feeling like the state needs to be harsher. So what we've been talking about the whole time is the state
Yeah.
is really harsh, and these are some reasons why that's not good. They were coming at it from the other angle and saying the police aren't doing shit because they don't care if we overdose. So we're going to get our bros together from the church group and go out and snatch people right out of their homes if we think they've done drugs. And what they were doing is basically running their own espionage group, meaning meaning that someone, and this is just run out of the church, right? Some deacon, the equivalent of a deacon, has a ledger, and it's all the people that are rumored to like to do drugs. God, hey, God help me if I was from that indigenous group in my 20s. I'd be on the list, maybe.
Yeah.
As a guy who had done it before, right? I was never
Yeah.
super into drugs. Even now, I hardly even drink. But we all had like our wild times in the 20s. So a lot of times you're getting guys like that, their names getting written in the ledger. Okay, let's go to their house, snatch him up, and basically, whip him with bamboo canes. And so I saw them pulling people out of their house and whipping people on church property. So then you beat that guy or woman and say, who else do you know that's done drugs? And so they're gonna rat out their friends, and then they get snatched out of their home. And it's like a parallel justice system, even with its own parallel rehab prisons, because once you admit to having used drugs, they throw you in what's essentially a cell made of bamboo or wood to dry out. And then after that, you're in kind of a prayer camp. So you wake up every morning, you're illegally detained, essentially. But you have
Yeah, I mean, they're not the police. They have no authority.
right. And you have to pray, and you have to sing like Christian rock songs, and they feed you. And I'm telling you that, I got a lot of feedback from that where people were saying, don't you think it's horrible and sinister what they do to those people? You can make your own judgment, but I'm telling you, they really thought this was an act of love, and they thought that this was sparing them from addiction, because they're like, look, hey, we don't have a lot of money, we are an oppressed group, we are fighting a rebel insurgency to keep our homeland against the military. We cannot afford all you guys running out here on dope. Like, shit is real. We do not have time for this. Clearly, everybody being high around here benefits our oppressors. So you're going to shape up and you're going to fly right. that was their attitude. So I really try to cover this as neutrally as possible and without any sort of overbearing agenda. So this is a nuanced story about a press group rising up and being hardcore about drugs. I was happy to cover that too, and just embrace the complexity of this problem.
So that's a very, I guess that's kind of leads me to my next point, neutrality. Obviously, I've watched some of the articles and some of the short docs that you produced, and it's I'm assuming very hard to stay neutral in certain stories, right? Especially when it's stuff that you're up in the mountains, you're with militias, and or you're with whoever, and there's beatings and there's shootings, or even with stories like the dog meat trade, which was horrific. That's something like I can watch anything, but when it comes to dogs, that I can't watch that stuff. That's something that that's my block. I can't go there, but I think as a journalist, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a journalist, you have to be neutral. Like otherwise, it's an opinion piece, right? Like you're not trying to push your agenda or political ideology or whatever it is. You're just giving the news, and you're letting the audience decide what they think, or you're just giving them the data and then let them process it however they want. And I was just wondering how much, fake news, for lack of a better term, do you see coming out of the West about Asia and in general, and maybe specifically about like South Korea and Myanmar and maybe even Thailand? And then also vice versa, how much fake news do you see in the area about the West?
Yeah, journalists need to do a better job of being more honest about their biases, and
Yeah,
so I try. I do a better job of staying perfectly neutral as best I can. Well, let me back up. Actually, there is no real such thing as neutral. I mean, everybody writes from a perspective, and
yeah,
pure total objectivity is an absolute myth. You are informed by your nationality, your background, what they taught you in school, and all of
yeah,
that.
correct.
So when journalists say I'm totally neutral, I'm totally objective, get real. You're not. So what you then have to do is sort of be honest about what your perspective is. When I say neutral, what I really mean is not being afraid to tell the story of people who are quote unquote the bad guys. So I would be more than happy to sit down and interview Kim Jong Un if he were willing to speak to me. Now I would try to ask him tough questions, but I'm interested in how this dictator sees the world. You can see this informs the way that I cover the drug trade as well. I'm really just looking at traffickers, and I'm saying, tell me your story. What matters to you? Why do you get up in the morning? What do you think about this business? And what are your objectives? And I'm going to put that out to you in a neutral way. I'm not going to write the story that portrays the police as always the hero chasing the bad guys, because that's just pure cowboys and Indians. And that that is very far from neutral. Yet if you write those type of stories, they get slotted in as neutral because our framework is drugs bad, cops good. um, Let me tell you, I've spoken to plenty of police officers and anti-narcotics agents who will tell you that not everybody on their side is good. And we can do my career field too. Do I think that all journalists are good? Is this some tribe that I have deep, loyalty to? Yeah, kind of. But I'll go ahead and tell you, there's a lot. No one is more angry at the media than me because I see the rot
Yeah,
from the inside. So that's what I try to do in staying neutral, is at least give put out the stories of people who you would otherwise never hear from. And if they are you mentioned some of my work in Vietnam, if they are stealing people's pets to support their methamphetamine habit, you're going to hear that story, but you're going to hear the reason why the guy is doing that. Hey, come steal my cat, and it's on, like, no mercy. So I'm not saying that is a cool thing to do at all, but I'm going
yeah,
to give you that uh, person's point of view, and I'm going to give you the perspective of the person who has had their dog stolen. And in that story, you have Vietnamese farmers who've had their dog stolen over and over, say enough, and attack in a vigilante style the people that were stealing their dogs. And hey, you don't hear that story much either, because the narrative is oh, Vietnam is this hell world of animal cruelty. No, I'm going to show you the Vietnamese farmer in his 60s or 70s even, who used to fight for the communists during the war with America. I'm going to show you how this guy loves his dog so much that he will hurt you
Mhm.
if you
Yeah,
try to steal it. When we open our eyes more and listen to more people's stories, I know it sounds a little bit cliche. You get
it's
some
true though.
interesting answers. You get some interesting view on the world. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I was actually happy. For me, and again, like, this is my bias. I love dogs. I don't understand how anybody can not love dogs or can be cruel to dogs. And, when I saw them beating the shit out of that guy that stole the dogs, and and I know, and seeing all the other things he's done to dogs, that was completely fine with me. I had no
sure,
problem with it whatsoever. I probably would have done the same, to be honest.
sure.
And I think I would have been within my rights. But
Yep.
going back a little bit, um, when I say neutral, I mean now when especially with this 24/7 news cycle, and there's just a narrative that's being told that is, there could be a story, and then let's take example Fox News. They'll tell the exact same story pushing their narrative, and MSNBC will tell the exact same story completely different pushing their narrative.
Hmm.
And it's kind of, I think we're at a point where I don't even know how news, the mainstream media, how they pick their stories. I mean, for example, you can have, I'll see breaking news, and it'll be, not that I really watch the news anymore, but just as an example, it can be Paris Hilton is in rehab, right? And this was like breaking news with whatever else going in the world. And then on the bottom, it'll be like 20 dead in Yemen from Saudi Arabian airstrike, right? Like,
Hmm.
so wait, so the Paris Hilton's breaking news, and we're going to spend an hour talking about this, but the 20 people that just died, that's just just a little tidbit that you're telling on the bottom. And it just seems like, like personally, and I think that's just what's happening with society, especially in the US. I'm not sure how it is in Asia, but I'm personally extremely jaded with mainstream media. I think they're not giving us journalism. They're not giving us the data. They're not giving us just facts. They are pushing a narrative both on the right and on the left. And they've kind of just drawn a line in the sand politically, ideologically, culturally, and they're not crossing that line. And it doesn't matter. Like Trump, and I hate Trump, he could do the best thing. He could, let's say, do world peace tomorrow, and CNN and MSNBC would not cover it correctly. And the same thing with Obama at the time. He could have done world peace, and Fox News would just not cover it in the right way. And I think it's just, and add a add to that social media and bots and everything. I think we're just really at a place right now where no one knows what the truth is anymore, and everyone is sure that they know what the truth is, but no one knows what the truth is.
Yeah, I mean, one thing from someone who's looking at this, now being 12 years removed from the United States,
Yeah.
what you would see on Fox and MSNBC, and I don't want to make a direct correlation that MSNBC is as bad as Fox or vice versa, but what I would say is that these channels are aligned with political parties. Right? It's very clear when you're watching MSNBC. It is aligned. It is a cheerleader for the Democrat Party. It's extremely clear when you're watching Fox News. It is aligned with the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party. So I try to look at America the same way America looks at other countries. If you were to see this happening in a different country, you would say, "Oh, okay. Well, this is the de facto mouthpiece for this political party that is struggling against this political party." That's just how it looks. So it takes on elements of propaganda for sure. There's a reason that MSNBC would have a lot of trouble doing something scathing about, say, Joe Biden, right?
Yeah.
They rely on contact with, with just say Joe Biden's camp to continue with their revenue model, which is, producing stories about the Democrat Party. So if they were to be all scathing, then you're burning a lot of sources. And they would literally get phone calls and text from the people that they get information from in the Democrat Party, being like, "What the hell are you doing? You keep this up, we're gonna cut you off." And the inverse is true. If Fox and Friends just goes and talks about how horrid Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic is, he will not call them anymore. His team will deny them information, and they will lose their fundamental operating model for how they continue. It's not any different in other countries. You have certain channels that are aligned with the military in certain countries. You have certain channels that are aligned with this political faction in certain countries, and so America is no different. I do want to say one nice thing about America, which I don't do often enough.
America is listening. Yes.
Yes, America. Here's my one nice thing I'm going to say, because I really do. Uh, Maybe I don't know if this is old school or not. I think that if you love a place or a country, you have to be brave enough to criticize it so you can make it better. I don't, is that anachronistic? I don't know. But the one thing that does separate the United States from the countries that I operate in is it's that First Amendment, man. It's that First Amendment. Man, if we lose that one, we're so screwed. There are stories that I do not write or do not produce because I'm literally not brave enough. in Thailand, in Myanmar, in a lot of these countries, I don't feel like I have the resources to stand up to the fight that might come if that story is printed. Most journalists won't admit this level of self-censorship, but I know that if I'm writing a story in the United States, I could say almost anything.
Say whatever you
I'm,
want, pretty much.
Say whatever you want. I might be socially outcast. I might be quote unquote canceled. I might be called like a heretic. I might burn sources. All those things might be true. But as far as going to jail,
Or disappearing in the jungles.
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in certain circumstances in the United States, but the climate is so much the culture around. It's crazy. Like if I go to the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly in North Carolina, and I say, "Hey, what's the so and so amendment to the Constitution?" No one's gonna know. I say, "Hey, what's the First Amendment?" Everyone knows First and Second.
Yep. Yeah.
We got those down, and so
Yeah.
that's it's baked into the culture and it's baked into the system in a way that I really wish some of the amazing journalists in Southeast Asia who are way smarter and braver than I do. I wish they had that privilege.
Yeah, but it's funny how people, and I see this more and more now, especially this year. I don't know if people are losing their minds because of COVID and everything else that's happening, but they keep, they're harping on this thing where, and I don't know if it's because they don't know enough about the world or they haven't traveled enough, but about how the US is the worst country and most oppressive country in the world, and they don't have rights here. And I'm like, dude, just go travel the world a little bit. You don't even have to go far, man. Go to countries in South America, go to Africa, go to Asia, go to Russia. There's most of the world, the overwhelming majority is just not as free. You're not as free to, if you're a woman, if you're LGBTQ, if you're a minority, you're just not as free. You're not as free to say what you want, to be what you want. And when people say that kind of crap here, like, look, it's far from perfect, right? There's, we're an evolving species and there's new laws and that we either have to replace or put in place or whatever it is. But to say that it's the most oppressive, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I do appreciate that when those rights are challenged even a little bit, Americans will stand up and fight for them. There is this sense of ongoing struggle. Like if we don't fight for these rights, they'll be taken away. So I like that people aren't complacent. What I wish that more Americans would tune into is we have certain rights and privileges in the United States. Could we could we possibly educate ourselves a little better to see how the damage that we're doing overseas? And if anything, that's a huge theme of my reporting and drug war reporting. Can we at least examine how things we're doing overseas by agencies that you don't ever pay attention to are affecting lives across the planet? Because the United States is an empire. I mean, there's no getting around it. It's an empire in decline, but it's an empire. So, yeah, we the people that you vote for, pay attention to what they're doing overseas, because we've gotten away with a lot of bad things. Not all bad, but if we care about our image overseas, which is in rapid decline,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
might want to focus on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been outside the US for a while now, and would you say America is the most scared nation? And I'll explain what I mean. you know, Whenever there is something here, news and corporations are constantly selling us fear and self-loathing, and from guns to bunkers to cleaning supplies and supermarket aisles and toilet paper. Like, Americans respond to fear with shopping, and any impending doom, real or perceived. There's a massive excuse me, shopping spree that happens, and we just clear the aisles of whatever it is, guns, supermarkets. They'll just buy all that shit up. And I just wonder if that happens in. I'm originally from Israel, and when we had wars, I don't remember that same kind of panic.
Mm-hmm.
And here, when there's just anything like a storm coming or anything that comes, it's immediately just. And again, it's the news. They're just putting this fear 24/7 news cycle of, oh, this is the worst thing that's going to happen to humanity. Everyone's going to die. It's the worst of the worst of the worst. Instead of just kind of informing us and saying, like, hey, be prepared. Which probably, I don't know, just giving us the facts instead of sensationalizing and driving fear into the hearts of everyone.
Yeah, I really can't put it much better than you did. I would just say, from the outside now looking in, Americans often look to be incredibly mentally feeble often. And I mean that because they are easily scared and their skin is very thin. I mean, the worldview of, like, looking out your window as an American is often fear based, and the media does certainly drive that. But
Yeah.
just unwilling to tolerate inconvenience, feeling of being besieged at all times. Look, this has this culture of being so afraid of everything has horrific consequences for people across the world. How easily were Americans convinced that we had to invade Iraq because something 9/11?
Yeah.
And how easily are we convinced that if you don't fight them over there, we'll have to fight them over here? I don't think Saddam Hussein was going to get on a boat and come to New York and do anything. You want to make the argument that we're going to make them freer. I think that is transparently silly, but at least it's an argument. But if you want to make the argument that if we don't go start this war, we'll be invaded by this country that has 2% of our military spending, just like that culture of fear radiates outward to the world and can be very harmful. I can tell you, this comes back to the drug trade. The DEA and the Department of Justice has some people on its wish list that it would like to extradite to the United States who are accused of being drug traffickers. Okay. Some of these people are in the leadership cast of indigenous armed groups that are effectively running their own governments. So when you listen to the justification of, we have to go and capture these people and bring them to America because they made drugs that maybe got shipped to California one time. Okay, but you realize that you're going to be decapitating the leadership of an indigenous group. I'm not saying that they're great guys or anything, but you realize you're going to be doing that, and that's going to be horribly destabilizing. It's like, no. Their justification is they have sown violence and terror across the United States because their drugs made it to American shores. So, okay, are we that sensitive? If I make drugs in one part of the world and they end up in California and your loved one gets hooked on those drugs, um, should you go after me? Should you go after the person that made those drugs? And should you destabilize this other part of the planet with the war on drugs? It's a question that you have to ask. So that culture of fear is it gives a big big wooden stick to the U.S. government to use to hit people with across the world, and we justify it thinking, hey, well, they hurt our society somehow, so they got to go.
Yeah, it's tricky. I honestly, I think the media is partly to blame. I mean, I don't know. Do you see a road for the media? Because now with clickbait titles and with parties and news organizations being affiliated more closely, and with the loss of, I would say, credibility and maybe also the trust of people. I mean, it's you could argue it's one of the most important jobs. If you have a society that is well informed, that's a good society. I mean, they're going to make good choices.
Mm.
It's usually educated people, but it's kind of going in the opposite direction. Do you see a path for the, I don't know, journalists and for news to kind of capture the what's the word? The trust of the people
Mm.
again?
Yeah, I have both a positive and negative outlook. Do I see a near future in which the media is responsible and not producing fear-based or party-aligned news? No, not at all. It's getting worse.
Yeah.
I don't see any sign that that is going to reverse course whatsoever. Moreover, like the funding model for the media has been gutted as things have moved online, and so I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to still have a job. Um,
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean, it just in this career field. I mean, it's kind of like trying to be a ballerina or something. You just feel lucky to be here. it's it's to get paid to do it.
Yeah.
And then it just it has been gutted. Um, so that's the bad outlook. There's a good outlook too. So I'm not very nostalgic for the way the media was set up in the past. Let's say the '90s, when you had a few corporations, a few big news channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, whatever, um, as the only channel through which to get your voice out. So
Yeah.
if Tom Brokaw isn't talking about it at 7 p.m., it's not really happening. Um,
Hmm.
Even local news, which has been devastated. I am a bit nostalgic for when every medium-sized town had a pretty damn good newspaper. But even then, if you wanted to say something, or if there was some sort of voice in society that wanted to be heard, you had to go convince, let's face it, usually like a middle-aged white guy at NBC, at your local paper, to
Yeah.
say, okay, I will give you a voice. Okay, I'll give you some ink in this paper. I'll give you some airtime.
Hmm.
Something that is really great is social media in that regard. So now, if I want to know how someone feels in this part of the country or what people are really interested in, I can find out. They're going online and telling me for free. So the gatekeepers have been just blown away, and now you can see it across the United States. I mean, do you? I don't think that, say, the Black Lives Matter movement would be able to have gained so much currency and energy and steam um, uh, in, say, the '90s, or it would have been a lot more difficult. It would have to be headed up by some organization who would have to rally people over the phone. And this
Yeah.
organization would then have to go to NBC and see if they could get on television to talk about them. That would be edited down. If they said anything too radical or anything too
Hmm.
scary, that would be edited out or used to make that organization seem um, seem like a threat to you and your kids.
Yeah.
So now that's all gone, and there's something really refreshing about that as well. So that's the one nice thing I can say about social media.
I feel like the internet and social media, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's we're in the era of information. We have all the information that we ever wanted in our fingertips. There's almost no excuse not to know, right? You can just Google it and you'll get the information. You can read the books. You can listen to the interviews and the podcast and the web. There's just endless. There's too much content for us to even consume. We're not going to be able to consume even 1% of it in our lifetimes. And on the other hand, Google searches and whatever appears at the top can be manipulated, and there's just I don't know, Infowars masquerades as a news channel, and it's on par with the new. It seems like if you're just searching like Infowars and New York Times, it's if you don't really know too much, you're like, okay, these are the same. They're both giving me information, and just anybody can who's a blogger can put out information that seems legit, and he doesn't really have to you know go to school for it. He doesn't. There's no bar he has to. There's nothing. He can just put all the information out there. So it's great for information. It's also great for mis and disinformation. Um, yeah, it's a tricky one. Like I do see a lot of positives, but just with anything else, there's also the negatives.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it used to be. So I had fringe interest in the 90s as like a punk rock kid. And I lived in a small town. So how did I engage with that world? Through the mail. Like literally I was ordering, Xeroxed fanzines and writing people letters
Yeah,
and getting these fringe magazines delivered to my small town. So that's back in the 90s. If you had some fringe political interests, like Bill Clinton is actually a lizard, then it was there, but you were having to really work hard to get to the "we're run by lizard people" idea.
yeah, yeah.
And and now, if you want to think that we're all run by lizard people, you can just live in that world all day long. Of
Yeah.
course, the best example of that being the flat Earth thing, right?
Jesus, yeah. Don't even get me started on the flat earther.
But one thing the media does, and this is something that my people do, is that's so goofy and funny that people think that the world is flat, that we blow them out of proportion too. So I mean, how many people really believe in the flat Earth thing? Probably started off as maybe 10. Then it gets so much traction in the media, or even like the if not the traditional media, like something like Vice or one of these media outlets, that more people get exposed to the idea, and 99% are laughing, but that 1% hop
Yeah,
on
they're
and
like,
they become
oh,
flat
oh,
earthers.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Convention in Las Vegas, you say? I might join that next
yeah.
year. Yeah,
Road trip.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I I'm okay with this world that we live in. It hasn't been good to the media. I'm willing to take the pros with the cons. I don't want to go back to the world where there are only a few gatekeepers allowing anyone to speak. And I also don't want. Look, if I had my job where I am now, I would, in let's say foreign correspondent in Thailand. Back in the 80s, I'd be comparatively probably making more money and have a more rosy outlook for my future. I wouldn't be so concerned that my job would vanish because of funding problems. Um, but I don't think the job would be as engaging. Now I'm here. Okay, everything's a little bit more chaotic, but I can really I can get on social media and I can talk to people in some far-flung part of Myanmar. I can find out what's happening all around me in say Vietnam more quickly. I mean, before you called me, I was trying to contact a former military intelligence agent from Burma using Facebook. So
yeah.
yeah, I really hope he writes back. But how the hell would I have done that in the 80s? I would have to really go to the right clubs and drink martinis with the right people. And
Yeah.
beg for information. It would just be so much harder.
Imagine those like movies, the spy movies back in the day where like you said, like that would be the setting, like for them to try to like meet a contact. Like in 2020, it would just be like some dude on Facebook, just be like, yeah,
It is.
Facebook, Twitter, just trying to find like some warlord. That's funny.
Yeah, or I don't contact them, but I know the children of certain quote unquote drug lords, what the DA would call them, and like what they do on Facebook and where they go to school, and they,
Really?
yeah, and they go to school in America or London, and they seem like totally normal kids, being like,
Yeah.
this month is LGBTQ Pride Month, and we have to stand with, yeah, seeming
Yeah.
like very liberally minded normal kids, and in a way they are when their dad has been hunted by the DEA for 20 years. So it's that's
Daddy just shipped a ton of ecstasy to Amsterdam. Here, LGBTQ month.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure, exactly, yeah. And it's really great because that gives you an insight into these families that you normally wouldn't get, and it demystifies them too. I mean, look, these kids, they're just rich kids doing rich kid things, studying fashion design at some school in London.
Yeah. It's
You know,
not their fault. Yeah. They're just living life. They're just, they're living the with the cards that they were dealt.
yeah, the cards were off pretty good actually.
Pretty good, huh?
Yeah, yeah, quite good.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not an easy life though. They're always kind of like I'm probably looking over their shoulders. I mean, obviously a lot of money and prestige and stuff, but I'm assuming the inner workings probably not. I don't know. Probably not the best. I'm assuming. I have no idea.
I think it would be actually a little bit similar to being the kid of a head of state for a country that,
Politician. Yeah.
yeah, that was in a bit of turmoil. So if I'm the daughter of a someone in the Korean People's Army in North Korea, that dad or the overall family is shunned by the world, and it's a bit embarrassing, but you might be able to get that Chinese passport or something to go and study abroad. So it would be similar to that. I mean, looking over their shoulder, yes. Fearing sanctions, yes. Fearing that your family's business would be exposed, yes.
Yeah.
Also having a ton of money and privilege, also yes. So
Yeah. Yeah, dad could just pass off as a politician until like the age of like 15 when they start, or 14 when they start using Google. And what does daddy do?
yeah, it's
Uh,
actually funny. I've spent a lot of time on the Thai Burma border, and up there, it used to be controlled by um, the anti-communist army that was backed by the CIA back in the day that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation.
Yep.
So guess what the grandkids of those CIA-backed opium trafficking guerrillas are doing? Well, the prophets, some of them stayed in the family and they went on to go to college and lead pretty normal lives. I mean, they have a little bit more money than the average person, but
yeah.
they no longer are in that world. Their father lived this dramatic swashbuckling life, or sorry, the grandfather did, and now they're normal kids. So I was talking to the granddaughter of one of these guys, and she said she was in college and started doing a bit of looking around about grandpa, and was like, holy shit, what? He did what? He knew who? And it often is shielded from them until the age of 18, 19, 20, where if they're not in the family business, they end up going off and doing something else. And then if they're curious enough, they can Google around and figure out who grandpa is, or who the media says grandpa is.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not something you really do. I mean, I've never Googled my grandparents. It's just not something you really do. So I mean, I guess there's no unless I don't know, you're suspicious of something. Like, there's just no real reason to do it. So
Yeah, most
it's
people.
funny.
My grandfather worked in a carpet factory in a small town, so I don't think you
Yeah,
can Google anywhere. But hey, maybe I'll find out something else if I get to typing.
yeah, you never know. Patrick, I want to thank you so much, man. I had a blast. This was super insightful, and I learned a lot of shit today. So thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Roy. If anyone wants to read about my work, I have a book that came out 2 years ago called Hello Shadowlands. I think the full title is Hello Shadowlands Inside the Meth Fiefdoms, Rebel Hideouts, and Bomb-Scarred Party Towns of Southeast Asia. But just Google Hello Shadowlands and it'll come up. It's on Amazon. It's in bookstores in the US too. And it's nonfiction, and it's the stories of bandits, smugglers, rebels, often showing you life from their perspective instead of the perspective that you usually see in the media. And cops and anti-narc agents too. Their stories are in there too. So yeah.
And where can people find you on social media?
On Twitter, I'm at pwinn5, PWINN5. And yeah, that's the best place for people to follow my work. My day job is doing radio for a show called The World, which is broadcast on NPR stations. That's anything and everything. And my work specifically on the drug trade that I do on the side is usually gets posted on Twitter.
Yeah, and that's where I found a lot of the content. So guys, make sure to check it out. It's really awesome, really informative stuff that, eye-opening as well. I didn't know about half the stuff before I looked into it. And I'll be sure to put all the necessary information, the book, the website, Twitter on the show notes, so it makes it easier for everyone to find it.
Awesome. Roy, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man, I had a blast. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll do it again in the future.
Anytime.
All right, man. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Take care. You too. Bye-bye.